Shortly after Final Fantasy VI's development on the SNES, the development of Final Fantasy VII began in 1994 on the Super Nintendo with the continued genius of the series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi heading the project. Up to this point, Final Fantasy games had all taken place in a medieval fantasy setting, with Final Fantasy VI starting to introduce mechanical figures into the game too. This time, however, Sakaguchi envisioned a game that took place within the real world, New York City in the year 1999. The story involved a group of characters that were on a quest to destroy New York's reactors that pumped the planet's life energy known as Mako in their pursuit to save the planet, but would lead to the team to eventually blowing up the whole city. Meanwhile, all this was happening while being pursued by a detective simply known as Joe. Now you may have noticed that this is quite different from what you might know of what Final Fantasy VII is, and that is because that was the original story, and this story would stick to its basis in the opening hours of the final game too, but heavily altered. Being that it was on the Super Nintendo, it was being perceived as a 2D isometric game, but with the advent of the 3D era of gaming coming quickly, the team at Squaresoft made the decision to jump ship to the Nintendo 64. As such, they built a tech demo to show off at the SIGGRAPH 1995 show, featuring Final Fantasy VI characters to test what they could do on the N64 and their ideas of a cinematic battle system. Problems quickly arose. While the N64 was a strong machine that could pump out a lot of polygons, it was a hard machine to develop for, with the N64's RAM's complicated architecture. This making the idea of switching between a low poly overworld to a high poly battle system very tough to do. But the biggest hurdle to all of this was the abysmally low storage of the N64 cartridge, being released in only 4, 8, and 12 megabyte carts at launch. As such, the 64 disk drive add-on was considered to remedy this, but even then at only providing 64 megabytes of storage. As such, this was still a very limiting factor. However, Squaresoft was soon approached by Sony, who invited them to develop for their new gaming console, the Sony PlayStation. A console that not only made it easy to develop for and make the transitions a lot easier to conduct, but provided a whopping 700 megabytes of space. But while this was tempting, it would require them to tell Nintendo that they were giving up on developing Final Fantasy VII for the N64. And so, in a meeting with the president of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, Sakaguchi, and the president of Squaresoft, Masafumi Miyamoto, as well as the lead programmer Ken Narita, blew this bombshell to him. Something that would keep Yamauchi angry for years. But at long last, Squaresoft was now free to develop the very game they wanted without limits, and now on the Sony PlayStation. And so today, on this first of this multi-parter, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of Final Fantasy VII. If you enjoy this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. With the shift to the PlayStation, the game saw a massive reboot, with Yoshinori Kitase as the game's de facto director, coming in from Final Fantasy VI, and co-writing alongside Kazushige Nojima, who themselves was coming fresh from Bahamut Lagoon, had Sakaguchi now in more of a producer role. Nojima and Kitase's first task was a complete overhaul of the plot, which soon the story was pushed back into more of a fantasy setting. Gone was the New York setting, and rather now in a world that was described as ambiguously futuristic, a place called Midgar. While it kept a lot of the modern designs of New York, the city was reimagined in a sort of pizza shape, originally envisioned in the idea that it was designed by cultured civilians who wished to escape the world below that was running out of Mako. This idea soon evolved into just being a separation between the slums and the modern city. However, the idea for New York City and the detective story were eventually repurposed for Squaresoft's other game, Parasite Eve. But with the game being in a fantasy setting once more, it opened a lot more wiggle room on how they want to spin it. With that came the idea of having the city run by the Shinra Electric Company. while the team that wished to destroy the very Mako reactors was given the name of Avalanche. The group from the get-go included the protagonist Cloud Strife and team member Barret Wallace, as well as the heroine Aerith Gainsborough. To design such characters, longtime serious artist Yoshitaka Amano began several designs of such characters, but this time Amano had an already packed schedule as he was opening an art workshop and exhibition in New York and France. Despite getting some work done, a search for a new artist was needed. By that point, Squaresoft designer Tetsuya Nomura, who was involved with already pitching various ideas for the story, was someone who had piqued Sakaguchi's interest. While many delivered printed text documents to him, Nomura handed everything to him in handwritten text with small illustrations. It may have been a small gesture, but that got Sakaguchi interested in his art. And so Nomura was now tasked with drawing these new characters in his art style, drawing them in both a less stylized manner and chibi manner as well that could be used by staff to design the characters. While characters like Cloud Strife went through several differences, including having a more slicked back hair originally, this went as far as to even try to decide on what his proportions would be, to even having darker skin in one instance, let alone designing Cloud's Buster Sword in various ways, including one that had it in a blood red tone. Meanwhile, a character named Blow, who would be later named to Barret Wallace, was designed as a take on Mr. T, and originally had a blockier design and even carried a machine gun in his regular hand too, aside from his already machine gun arm. However, Nomura wasn't just set as a basic artist at that point, as he kept up with providing ideas for the creative process, including giving every playable character a special attack that they'd use when a certain gauge would fill up, called a limit break, leading to the creation of unique and different ones each character would have. However, the story was now expanded beyond just a simple eco-terrorist group versus an evil corporation story, especially with the old antagonistic detective character out of the picture. A new character had to be introduced, something never seen before in the series: the villain Sephiroth. Sephiroth was designed with the idea of being a character that the team would continuously pursue, whose goals involved taking control of the planet and becoming one with the game's other new concept, the Lifestream. The Lifestream was perceived as a plane where the dead in Final Fantasy VII go and become one with the planet. This was a concept that Hironobu Sakaguchi proposed due to the loss of his mother back when she died during the development of Final Fantasy VI, a means of coping with her death by exploring the theme of life with this game. But along with that, Sephiroth's backstory involved another character by the name of Aerith Gainsborough, the lead heroine of the game. Made as a flower girl on introduction, but was initially being designed as Sephiroth's sister, which both Yoshitaka Amano and later Nomura even designed the two to have a resemblance, especially in the hair department. However, the story beat was eventually changed to Sephiroth just being Aerith's previous lover to further deepen her backstory, which together with that comes the game's other villainous element, Jenova. Jenova in early stages of development was a state of being, or rather an untapped portion of the brain rather than an actual character, and the idea was that if this Jenova part of the brain was unlocked, they'd unlock special abilities or senses such as the sensitivities to one's thoughts. Either one was born with it, which would in this instance have been Aerith in the original pitch, or with exposure to Mako would unlock it, thus Sephiroth at this stage. However, Jenova soon evolved past that into an actual physical being an alien from space that the team would pursue, and at that stage, Sephiroth was actually a manifestation of Jenova that they were chasing here, and that the rest of Jenova split itself apart and manifested as black cloaked figures that would be approaching this version of Sephiroth, whether it be her arm or even her heart. In fact, all that would remain by the time of reaching Sephiroth at the Whirlwind Maze would be Jenova's floating heart, moving as a faceless black cloak. Related to Jenova in all this was also this Switch character that Nomura was drawing up to. Not too much is known about her, but theories have went as far as to say that she may have been designed as a servant of Jenova, a cult leader of Jenova, or even the final form of Jenova to be faced as the final boss. Whatever she was meant to be, she was scrapped and left to be used in the next entry as a more prominent villain. That and Jenova soon changed into being more of a character that Sephiroth took control of and would manifest in his bid to reaching his goals. But going back to her protagonist, he was was now getting a major development in his story. In developing Cloud's backstory, Nojima contributed to the idea of Cloud having a very unclear idea of his past, to the point of misremembering it, and even developing split personalities. This in turn created the character Zack, a character who Cloud would think he was in the past. In fact, Zack's design seemingly may have originated in taking Cloud's original design with the slick back hairstyle, but black instead. And with the introduction of Zack, Sephiroth was replaced as Aerith's former lover, and instead became someone in Cloud's own past that he would have to deal with. Eventually, the theme of life was coming to a crux within Sakaguchi's game. Feeling it was not enough to make life the theme, you need to depict living and dying. In any event, you need to portray death. For this, the team decided that someone had to die. But at this point, the team only had 3 playable characters. You couldn't kill Cloud as he was the protagonist, leaving only Barret and Aerith as their choices. The team as such got into a hot debate over who should die, with some going with Barret dying, while Tetsuya Nomura proposing that Aerith should die. Ultimately, the decision was made. Aerith must die. The decision to kill her was one that director Yoshinori Kitase felt would be very unexpected and surprising, whereby he stated that it would leave not a dramatic feeling, but great emptiness, feeling of reality and not Hollywood. In contrast, Barret would be almost too expected to die. The series tends to have a trope up to that point, whereby the brave, kind hero would end up sacrificing himself, much as seen in games such as Final Fantasy V. However, while it was agreed upon that this would be the direction the game would go in, it created another problem. The heroine was now dead. As a result, a new heroine was now required to be written in, rather than let it become just a group of men. Up to this point, the game followed a flowchart of character relationships to one another. When Aerith was decided not to be Sephiroth's sister, a character by the name of Tifa Lockhart had been designed with the idea of potentially filling in that role. In the search for a new heroine, Tifa was taken and now made into a playable character, written as Cloud's childhood friend that would from the get-go be with Avalanche, but as well open the doors to the idea of a love triangle with both Tifa and Aerith as rivals for Cloud's affection, something that Kitase liked as it would be very new to the franchise. But from there, more of the cast started to be introduced. One character that existed in very early Amano art was a red dog-like creature. When Tetsuya Nomura was in charge of bringing him in as a playable character, he struggled with the idea, as he had no idea of how this character would even climb ladders, let alone the fact that he might even clip through walls. But Nomura gave him the name Red 13, as it means to be a name that doesn't really sound like a name, yet also having the real name of Nanaki as part of his backstory. Others included the pilot character Sid Highwind, following the trope of characters in the series known as Sid. The ninja character Yuffie Kisaragi, who was originally made as a 25-year-old ex-soldier, much like Cloud, but originally pursuing both Cloud and Sephiroth for their bounties. Her design stayed relatively the same, but the colors were changed up, and her role was simplified to joining them to try to steal from them. Cait Sith was another character made as a robot controlled by Shinra insider Reeves. Originally made as a spy, whereby the bonds Reeves has with the party would have torn him on who he should side with. Something changed to him just trying to take down Shinra from the inside. But one of the longest developments to a character was in the form of Vincent Valentine. Existing since Amano's early art of him, and the character flowchart even showcasing that his design was at one point even considered for Sephiroth, his roles changed several times, from being a horror researcher to a chemist and even a detective, which may or may not have been related to the original detective of the game. As a detective though, he was one originally set to be working on mostly bogus supernatural cases, with his last job being on trying to expose Shinra to the world for the benefit of a rival company. Meanwhile, his backstory being one of knowing Professor Hojo from the days of Midgar University's medical department and the Shinra research lab, whereby he tries to investigate Hojo's work through Hojo's assistant Lucrezia, but ultimately leads to tragedy, with Hojo capturing her and using her for the Jenova project, while Hojo puts Vincent into a 30-year sleep when he tries to rescue her. Waking up in modern day and seeing all the experiments done to him to his surprise, including the ability to transform into monsters monsters for battle. Eventually, he was finalized as just being a former member of Shinra's intelligence agency, the Turks, with his backstory tweaked further regarding his relationship with Hojo, Lucrezia, and his monstrous powers. In fact, his weaponry was completely different too, having a scythe initially, before given a gun. Ultimately though, more plans were being designed around death, including the idea of killing off the whole cast by the end of the game, even before the final battle, something that Nomura stood strongly against and vetoed as it would only cheapen Aerith's death. And as the game's story and platform rounded out, it was now time for the game to finally start being built on the PlayStation hardware, that very hardware they had to sacrifice a long-lasting relationship with Nintendo to work on, and would still have to pull many tricks and sacrifices to get the game deemed by many as impossible to become a functional game, especially on the idea of how the game should even look, something that would go on to even divide this very team. So be here for part 2. As such, hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back with more Final Fantasy and other games cut content in gaming history soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have preferred any of the original cut story elements. So everyone, thank you for watching!